started so we can hopefully minimize how much I ramble on and Professor Riggs rambles on, and we can have a lively discussion about this event, this ongoing development in the Middle East that is the Islamic State. Our talk tonight is called Deconstructing the Islamic State, Religious and Political Challenges. So our talk tonight is going to present two really different perspectives and approaches to the Islamic State. My background is in contentious politics, so I studied protest movements, I studied authoritarianism from a political science perspective. Professor Riggs studies comparative religion and history, and is a Middle East specialist, so he's going to have a much more in-depth experience and skill set to the region. I'll have more of the theoretical background. Our sponsors tonight are the College of Public and International Affairs and the Global Affairs Society. So thank you very much for our sponsors. And let's begin. So the first thing to look at when you're analyzing what I've defined as a transnational social movement, I'll talk about what that is in a second here, but the first thing that you look at are the grievances. What are the social economic conditions that really set the stage for this kind of uprising to happen, or it really motivates people to get involved? And also importantly, what are some of the factors that we can look at when we're assessing political instability in a region? Is there anything that we can see? We don't know what the trigger is for these kinds of movements. It always seems very surprising, but what are the kinds of measurable factors that we can identify that suggest that a region or a country is ripe to experience this kind of violent social unrest? So the first factor that we've seen, that's very common around the Middle East, is rapid population growth, high birth rates, which have produced a large youth bulge. So throughout much of the Middle East, you see relatively young populations, lots of unemployed, angry young men, right? This is a very dangerous situation in a lot of ways. And if you can't provide, even if you have a growing economy, if it doesn't provide enough jobs to occupy those people, it can become a very dangerous, unstable situation. So this is one of the things to look at. Another symptom of upcoming unrest is human flight. If people are denied opportunities to engage the economy and move up in society in conventional ways, one of the alternatives is to flee the situation, is to physically leave the country. So we've seen high numbers of internally displaced people. We see large, essentially fixed refugee camps throughout much of the Middle East, especially concentrated around Syria and Iraq. And these can actually be launching pads for greater unrest. So this is a very serious sign of upcoming instability. Another one is globalizing pressures. This is a phenomenon that we see throughout the third world. Right? We see traditional cultures that are being dislodged by a lot of these movements that we've become very familiar with elsewhere. Growing consumerism, growing, sometimes we say Americanization, McDonaldization, the transformation of traditional societies and communities into, consumers, into producers, into people who are, isolated individuals. So this can be a very alienating situation. Also, we see the pattern of secularization, right? We see a lot of social practices that are deemed, immoral and wrong according to traditional ways of belief. People that are dressing differently, talking differently, listening to Miley Cyrus, is that the pop star I'll pick on? These kinds of things are very threatening and very, why do people buy these CDs? I don't know. Do people can buy CDs? It's all very disorienting and frightening to a lot of us. Also, we've seen the movement of people across boundaries, and we've seen the development of large diaspora communities. So we see large Islamic communities that have developed in places like France and Britain, etc. And depending on the country, the national site, you see higher levels of accommodation accommodation, you see higher levels of tolerance, or you see lower levels, where people do not mix in, where you see a lot of tension between these overseas populations and the indigenous population. So depending on the country, this can be a very destabilizing phenomenon. Another one is recent historical events. Some of these things that we may not have thought about as being really interconnected with one another. In 2007, we had the global financial crisis, which had a negative impact on economies throughout the world, right, throughout the region. In 2007, these economic challenges, you guys should really come forward. Just want to share.
Cool.
Anyway.
Thanks.
Like Woodstock in here. Anyway, very exciting. But anyway, 2007, in the middle of a challenging economic environment, Syria experiences a drought. So a very serious drought, in fact. This was this affected something like 2 to 3 million people. So you suddenly had people associated with agriculture and farming losing their livelihood and streaming into the city. So this is in the middle of a youth bulge. This is in the middle of economic instability throughout the world. Suddenly you see people streaming into cities looking for work. And this is a very, very destabilizing situation. In a lot of these countries, you have high-level resource dependency, resource extraction dependency. So in Iraq, high level of dependency on oil exports. In Syria, somewhat lesser degree, but during this period of time, demand for oil drops. So you see a drop in the global price of oil. So for governments that are very dependent on oil revenues, you suddenly see them less able to do things like provide social services, etc. In places like Syria and Iraq, you see the government cutting social programs dramatically. So people are already going through economic hardship because of droughts and economic slowing, and this is compounded by cuts to social programs, etc. You see rising inequality, so the resources that are there are not shared equitably. This is particularly nasty situation when you have sectarian divisions within these countries, where you have various groups that are competing over the already scarce resources. You have highly corrupt economies. If you try to start a business, it's like, how easy is it to start a business in Iraq or Syria? It's not easy, right? It takes something like 4 months to get a license to start a business in Iraq, right? So even if you are trying to follow the conventional path, start a business, provide for your family, etc., you'll run into obstacles left and right. So it's very hard to find a conventional route to success and achievement in these places. And a lot of it involves taking or giving bribes. You have to sometimes you have to pay people off just to get access to a market. So in this situation, it's really stacked against people who are at the bottom and trying to move up, in the right way. So you see people fleeing from the country. You also see people who are rejecting the system entirely and challenging it in various ways. All right, so let's talk about the way we've defined ISIS here. One is that ISIS is not really a state, right? It claims to be. What I would consider to be is a transnational social movement. So it's a combination of state and non-state actors that transcends boundaries. So ISIS would not be what it is if it wasn't for foreign fighters coming in, foreign funds coming in, foreign arms coming in, if it wasn't for a lot of these networks of people that have formed the backbone of this movement. So it's something other than the kind of actors that we usually talk about, states and citizens. It's something in between. It's in this third area, non-state actors. It has state actors that are allies, it has state actors that are opponents, but fundamentally it's something other than conventional politics that relates to states and citizens. All right. The political opportunity structure. When we study protest movements, one of the things that we look at are, why would a situation where you had economic stability, political stability, suddenly kind of explode, right? How does this happen? It always seems like it's such a surprising event that it couldn't have been predicted. And one of the things that we look at is that there are these windows of opportunity that are created. Societies are not, are moving targets in a lot of ways. Things are changing. Factions within governments are competing with each other. Governments have different shapes and sizes. Some are centralized, some are decentralized, some are more open, some are more closed, some are more or less inclusive. And this affects the way in which people relate to these governments. It becomes even more complex when we talk about a situation where they transcend boundaries. So when we're looking at this, we say, what was the window that was open that enabled an organization like ISIS to form, right? It's a set of unique circumstances. It's kind of like a perfect storm that had to be in place. You had to have the conditions in place. You had to have the perfect situation. And then you had to have people, agents that actually moved into that opportunity and seized that opportunity. So, talk about the Islamic State. We're talking about people who, heard opportunity knocking and then answered the door, right? So there's an important political historical context in play here. All right. Very quickly, what are some of the political opportunities that were present in these two interrelated countries? One is the high level of state centralization. So in Syria, in Iraq, decisions were made in national capitals. So when you're talking about local officials who are interacting with the population, the traditional maxim that all politics is local does not hold up. When people are interacting with local officials, they're dealing with people who are functionaries, right? People who are controlled by the national capital. So if these people do not have a level of independent decision-making to deal with local problems, then who do you blame, right? And the answer is, you blame the national government. If the street's not paved, you blame the national government. If there's corruption at every turn, you blame the national government. And then suddenly, everybody has, despite all the diversity that's out there in these societies, they have a common enemy, a common target that they can organize themselves around, and that is the national government. And so the high level of centralization is an important factor in all of this. You have low regime legitimacy. Legitimacy, as all my students should know, right, is the acknowledged right to rule, right? So basically, in these places, that acknowledged right to rule is in question for a number of reasons. One thing is, are there free and fair elections in Syria or Iraq? We built democracy in Iraq, right? 2003, EST. But anyway, in Iraq, there's effectively a stolen election in 2010, right? Where Maliki moved behind the scenes and maintained himself in power, right? So there's a lot of questions about the process through which people become leaders. And so if you ask people, why should I listen to you? The answer is a lot of times up for grabs. Do people respect the government? Do they obey the government, etc.? And a lot of times the answer is no, because the government lacks this kind of legitimacy. Importantly, factionalized elites have emerged in these two states. If the government is stable, if the government is united, what kind of chance do individuals or loose factions of people have in fighting a government? And the answer is almost none, right? We're almost always overwhelmed by state power. But what happens if the state suddenly is divided or weakened or unstable, right? That's your moment, right? That's the moment when you can seize the opportunity and take on a government. Is when the government is divided among itself, then suddenly you can appeal to one part of the government as an ally. So this is a very unique moment when you have factionalized elites that are openly divided and you can see the divisions. Importantly, these countries do not have effective control over their boundaries. The nation state is kind of like a clumsy dinosaur in the age of globalization, right? Nation states are bound by their own national borders, but transnational networks are very agile. They can move across boundaries. They can disappear. and then reappear elsewhere. Their sources of financing are very hard to track down.